Hello my friends, and welcome to episode 4 of the Zengem series. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to color with colored pencils in a correct way. So you've probably been coloring with colored pencils for your entire life, but the techniques I'm going to show you today are probably a little different from what you know, and it's going to make a huge difference in the way that you color with almost all materials. So what we're working on today is a technique called varnishing, and varnishing means that you are filling it in so solid that you can see that little shine from the wax. You guys see that right there? So you can see the shine of the wax of the pencil, and that means that it's filled in so solidly that you don't see the texture from the paper showing through. And that's what we're looking for throughout this entire unit when we're working with our colored pencils, is making sure that we are varnishing the entire thing. So in today's lesson, we're going to go through and practice 3 different ways of varnishing, using pressure, using a white colored pencil, and using another color to varnish with. So once you have practiced varnishing, I'm going to teach you how to complete these blending techniques, and we're working on having smooth transitions between one color to another. The last part that I'm going to show you in this episode today is how to go through and select different color scales for a gemstone. So let's go ahead and get started. Before I teach you the correct way to shade with a colored pencil, I'd like to show you what not to do. So this technique is called unvarnished shading, where you're coloring lightly with a colored pencil. You can see that grainy texture from the paper showing through, and oftentimes people will color lightly on the inside and then shade darker on the outside. And it's a very common coloring technique. But this is something that we are avoiding at all costs for this entire project. And the reason why is because the difference in quality is so clear between the unvarnished box on the left and the varnished box on the right. You can tell if an area is varnished by checking to see if it's got a waxy shine to it, because to varnish something, you have to apply enough pressure that it completely fills it in with that waxy texture from the pencil. We're going to begin practicing varnishing by starting with the pressure method. We'll begin this practice by applying a thick outline on the inside of that first box. And we're doing this to help us fill this in nice and neat so that we won't have any lines going outside of the box. Once you've finished outlining the inside of the box, you're going to slowly start filling in that space, and you're going to be pressing really hard with your pencil so that it fills it in all the way. That's our goal with this technique, is to varnish with pressure, so it does take quite a bit of pressure. I would recommend working in small circular motions to fill this space so that you don't end up with a bunch of lines. The final step to complete this practice is to add one more layer over the top, just to make sure that you didn't skip any little spots that will show through. Varnishing with pressure is a really great option when you're coloring with colored pencils, but you may not always want your color to be that dark. So another option is to apply a very light layer of the color that you choose, and then to add another layer of white colored pencil over the top. It's really easy to accidentally end up with a bunch of splotchy areas with different types of values for this method of varnishing. So it's very important that when you're laying out your first layer, that color that you're choosing to add the white over the top of, you really have to work and make sure that that entire space is nice and even and smooth. Because if you've got any lines or any blotches that are darker or any areas that are lighter, when you add that layer of white over the top, you'll definitely still be able to see it. So this should be as smooth as you can possibly make it without actually varnishing and applying a lot of pressure. The final step to complete this varnishing method is to take a white colored pencil and to apply a varnishing layer over the top of your lighter shade that you just added. So you're going to use your colored pencil in small circular motions, going over the entire space and overlapping with a varnished layer. So that means you're applying enough pressure that you don't see any of the texture from the paper showing through. The third and final varnishing method that I'm going to show you is varnishing with another color. So we're going to start in the same way that we did with the white, where we lay out a super smooth light layer of our first color. It's very important that the color that you lay down first is your darker color, and the color that you choose to layer over the top with is your lighter color. Because if you try to layer over the top with your darker color, obviously it's just going to cover up your lighter color. So lay your darker color down first, and then you're going to varnish, so apply a lot of pressure over the entire section that you were coloring with that second color. Now that you know how to varnish correctly, I'm going to teach you how to create transitions while still varnishing and working with colored pencils. The steps to complete all of these three different techniques are actually the exact same. The only difference is what color you're choosing to lay over the top of the value scale that you created. So when you're working with colored pencils, you're always going to start with your darker color. And I know that might be backwards from another way that you might have learned, but for this project, I would like for you to start always with your darkest color. We're going to begin the color shade by laying out our black first. And a color shade is where it goes from a color to a medium tone version of that color to a darker version of that color, then to black. So we're starting with the black end, and we're slowly lightening up as we go towards the middle of this value scale. I'm working with really small circular motions, and I'm applying quite a few layers to make sure that this is as smooth as I can possibly make it, because if this part isn't smooth and I go over the top of it and varnish with my lighter color, it is a lot more difficult to fix it that way. So it's in your best interest to go through and make this value scale with your black as smooth as you can possibly make it. Next, I'd like to show you how to fix it if your value scale looks like this. The problem is that my black section on the left-hand side had a very solid edge to it, where it turned to a lighter gray next to it. And if you've got any sections where you can see the difference, like there's an obvious line, that's where you need to focus your attention. And that's actually where you need to add another layer, is just directly over the line where you can see the separation between your sections. I also was demonstrating what to do if you've got a lot of lines showing in your space, and I'm just going through and filling in between all of those sections and keeping my pressure on my pencil consistent. As we're continuing with this value scale specifically, it's really important to pay attention to how much medium tone you have, because when we add our next color over the top of this, the only area that's going to change colors or make it look like it's fading will be the area where the color can go over the top of that black. So if you fill in your value scale and have mostly just varnished black and then a very small section of that light medium tone, then you're not going to have a successful transition here. We want to have enough of that medium tone area so that the color can blend in that space. As you're filling in your lighter values, make sure that you're working in small circular motions, because that's going to help prevent any lines from showing up in that space. And we really want our lighter end to be a super smooth, just barely added layer, so that our color that we add over the top can blend and mix with that area. For this next step, you're going to choose any color from your colored pencil set, and the next part is actually quite easy, because what we're doing is taking that color and varnishing with pressure over the top of the entire value scale. And that's going to do all of the work for you with all of your mixing, because we took the time to go through and add that value scale of black. And when we varnish over the top with another color, it makes it look like there's a really smooth transition from our color to a medium tone version of that color all the way to black. As you can see, this technique usually creates a really smooth transition between the colors. And the reason why it works is because we laid down our darkest color first and took our lighter color and varnished over the top of it. So anytime you want to create a shadow in an area of your drawing, I would recommend starting with the black, laying out a nice smooth value scale, and then taking the time to varnish over the top of it with another color. The next blending method that we're going to practice is called a color tint, and this means that we are fading from any color of your choice to a lighter version of that color all the way out to white. And our goal is to create a smooth transitioning value scale. So it's really important that we go through with our darker color, just like we did for our color shade. This step is going to be the same throughout this entire process. So we'll start with our darker color, and we're going to go through and varnish on that left side, and we're going to slowly lighten up the pressure as we continue going out towards the middle of that value scale. It's very important that you make sure you've got enough medium tone to work with, because if you don't lay out a lighter area of this color that will allow it to mix when you varnish over the top with white, then you're just going to end up with one solid block of color rather than an area that transitions. So we're focusing really hard on making this a nice smooth transitioning value scale that has enough of those medium tones. And your medium tones should reach at least halfway on your value scale, and you should continue working with really light values a little ways past, so it should be a bit more than 3/4 of your value scale. To complete this blending technique, you're going to choose your lightest color, which obviously is white for this one, and we're going to varnish with that white, going from the lighter end, so the area where it's supposed to be fading to white, and we're going to continue working our way towards the color. It's really important to do it in that specific order because sometimes your white colored pencil will pick up some color off of your paper and it'll actually lay it down in the area that you color with next. So if you've already been using your white for something else, you might even consider just scratching it on like a separate part of your paper so that you can clean it off before you start this step. You'll continue adding your white over the top of your lighter layers of the color that you chose, and our goal here is to make it a nice smooth transition, but also for your color to be getting closer to the original color of the pencil. So once we start to get closer to that darker end of the color, it's important that you start to lighten up your pressure with your white pencil so that you don't accidentally fill it in all the way with white and then make it not a smooth transition, more of just like a filled in block of color. So we really want to adjust our pressure with the white as we get closer to the original color on the other end. The next blending technique that we're going to try is called a color fade, and that means that we're trying to get one color to fade smoothly into another color. So we're going to start this scale in the same way where we choose which color is darkest between the two that we picked for this section, and we're going to lay down our darkest color first. And again, we're working to make a very smooth transition on this value scale. We want to start on the left end and make sure that it's varnished on that side before we continue out into the medium tones and lighter tones of that color. So we're going to go through with small circular motions, filling it in so it's super smooth and nice and neat, making sure we've got enough of that medium tone for our two colors to mix in the middle, and we'll add our lighter color over the top of it. Just like with our other blending techniques, we're going to take our lighter color and we're going to varnish over the top of the value scale that we created with our darker color. And that's how we get our colors to mix together and have a nice smooth transition.
Oh, so you went back to school?
This next portion of your assignment is meant to help you figure out which colors you'd like to use most while you're shading in your gemstones. So I'm going to show you a couple of different examples of ways that you can do this, but you are not limited to these colors. So don't feel like you have to match this exact color scheme. The first example I'm going to show you is basically just one color that changes in value. So we're going to begin by laying out our main color, just that solid blue, and we're filling it in without varnishing. And that is very important that we do not varnish until the end. So we're starting with just a medium tone layer. We're going to get darker and darker, and I actually skipped to the end to fill in that blue and have it be solid and varnished. And then I used that to help me figure out what the tone would look like in between those two that I'd already created. Now that we've filled in the darker shades, we're going to skip to the other side of the value scale and fill in our lightest values. Make sure that you are working so lightly and that you're using small, light circular motions. We don't want to see any splotches or lines in these areas. Next, to make this color more interesting, I chose to go over it and varnish with my lighter color of yellow. So I'm going over the top of all of these and varnishing and making sure that I don't have any sections where I have the texture from the paper still showing through. As I get to the lighter end, I don't want to varnish with my yellow. I'm going to come back over the top of it with a white to help varnish, because if I varnished it with the yellow, it wouldn't really change in value. So I'm going back over the top and varnishing with white on that left side where it's supposed to be a little lighter. I also noticed that I could bring that white in just a little bit past the halfway point just to tie those values together a little bit more. The first example I showed you was pretty much just a value scale of one color, but what I want to show you next is how to create a color scale with analogous colors, which means they are colors that are next to each other on the color wheel, so they transition really well from one color to the next. To begin, I laid out my pencils and made sure they were in the correct order, and I skipped one section just where I knew it was going to get lighter. When I'm filling in these areas, I'm almost varnishing, and then to varnish the area that I just finished, I'm actually going to grab the pencil that was directly in front of that shade and use that to help varnish. Then I'm going to use that same color to fill in that box, and I'm going to use the color in front of it to help add a layer to varnish. So again, since I was varnishing with that color in the last box, I'm going to use it to almost fill in the next box. Then I'm going to use the color in front of that to help varnish over the top of the layer that I just made. Then again, that color is what I'll use for the next box, and I'm going to use the color that's in front of it to help varnish over the top of it. Then I'll use that same color to fill in a lighter layer on that box, and I'll use the color that's next to it, which technically is the yellow, so I'm going to varnish over the top of it with that lighter color. Then I'm going to use that same color to fill in the next box, and I'm going to just press a little bit lighter, even though it's the same two colors that are being overlapped. I just chose to add a light layer and then fill in the last box yellow to make it have a nice smooth transition. For this final example, I'm going to show you how to blend two different colors together in this color scale. So we're going to start in the same way that we started for our first color scale, and we're going to add a value scale, essentially. Next, I'm going to take my lighter of those two colors, which for me is the red, and I'm going to go over the top of those layers, and on the shade side, I'm going to varnish. But as I get closer to the lighter side, I want to just start pressing really lightly and adding light layers of that lighter color. That way I can go back over the top and varnish with white as I finish this up. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me for this episode. I hope it was helpful to learn a little bit more about using colored pencil techniques and how to make it look super professional. So for our next episode, I'm really excited to show you how to use the techniques that you learned in today's episode to create gemstones with colored pencil. So I will see you soon to learn how to do this. Thanks for watching.